Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelsey Richard, and I am the Associate Director for Workforce Innovation at the Manufacturing Institute. Welcome to the MI's first Solution Series event. We are launching the Solution Series to provide a continuous learning opportunity between our annual workforce summits, which happen every October. We're thrilled to have you join us today, but before we dive into the details of today's webinar and introduce you to our panelists, I want to give you a brief overview of the Manufacturing Institute. So, the MI is the Workforce Development and Education Affiliate of the National Association of Manufacturers, and we are dedicated to building and strengthening the manufacturing workforce of today and tomorrow. And in order to support our mission and our manufacturers, our scope of programming and collaborations and innovative research include several key factors. One of which is our Heroes Make America team, which connects transitioning military members and veterans and their spouses to manufacturing careers and offer certifications and career readiness training to transition them into the workforce. Also, the FAME USA team, which is an employer-driven earn and learn apprenticeship style model, which allows students to go to work and to go to school to earn advanced maintenance technician degrees. Also, my team, which is the Workforce Innovation Team, and it's a portfolio of innovative solutions to aid our manufacturers through second chance hiring best practices, workforce policy, and employer-led community workforce development strategies and student engagement. So, today's event is a collaborative effort between the Manufacturing Institute and PwC, which is aiming to provide valuable insights into the power of frontline leadership. So, today I will be monitoring the chat and facilitating our Q&A. So please feel free to add any thoughts or questions to our chat as we go along. We also just have a couple of housekeeping items and run of show reminders. So Katie, if you don't mind to help us with those.
Yes, of course. And thank you, Kelsey. My name is Katie Harker. I'm the operations team lead at the Manufacturing Institute. And before we get started, I just want to give a few housekeeping reminders for folks. This will be a recorded webinar, and we'll share the link with all registrants after the event so that you can reference it. All participant microphones have been muted upon entering the meeting, and we encourage you to use speaker view in the top right corner of your screen for the best viewing during this discussion. Lastly, as Kelsey mentioned, there is a chat feature which can be accessed from the bottom of your screen, where we encourage you to post discussions and resources to supplement today's conversations. If you have any questions for the panel or for the rest of the MI team, please feel free to post in the chat. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can do so and our team can help out. With that, I just want to pass it back to Kelsey for this great conversation.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, let's dive right in. I am honored to introduce my colleague, Victoria Bloom, Head of Research at the Manufacturing Institute, who will be leading our discussion and introducing our PwC partners. Victoria, it's all yours.
Thanks, Kelsey. So I wanted to introduce two others from PwC who will be joining the discussion today. We have John Karen, who's a partner of workforce transformation at PwC, and then Drew Goheen, who's a manufacturing workforce research analyst at PwC. And to provide some background for this conversation, the MI and PwC released a report earlier this year on how we can build a better manufacturing workplace through frontline leadership. Both John and Drew were integral partners in that research, so we're thankful they could join us today to discuss the results and provide their expertise on the topic. So now, before we get into the findings of the report, I want to provide some perspective of the manufacturing economy and labor market challenges of the industry. During the pandemic, we had a historically tight labor market. There were nearly 1 million job openings back in manufacturing at its peak. And although it has eased quite a bit in the last few years, it's still relatively tight by historical standards. Manufacturing still has nearly 500,000 job openings. And with the average age of a manufacturing worker being older than the industry-wide average, 44 years compared to 42, retirements will be a great challenge in the coming years, as will the new jobs that we will need to be filled due to industry growth and new investments. So that gap in the workforce continues to be a major issue. Now, I want to pitch it to John first and to talk a little bit about, this labor shortage. I know that you've seen many frontline workers being promoted into leadership roles faster than expected. Can you speak to what you've seen on this front and maybe some of the pain points those faster promotions may be creating?
Yes, and thank you for having us. It's been just a great collaboration with MI as we've been tackling this just important topic around frontline leadership and how to be able to not just develop them, but to identify how you help them be successful and upskill them. And what we're describing here around frontline leaders is this labor shortage that has been looming over us and has continued to create some challenges in the industry, has really fast-tracked individuals into that frontline leader role. And the preparation that's necessary for that, often cycles of time, are what we're used to seeing and preparing them, giving them the opportunity to have some mentorship and some apprenticeship model also helps them in that capacity. But that shortage of labor puts pressures not just on leadership, but it puts pressures on the ability to absorb where there's retention challenges, meaning that just further constrains your ability as a leader. Absenteeism may become higher. And so when we're thinking of leaders being promoted, there's those who are either leaving or the capacity to work is there. So yeah, Victoria, it is an important but challenging role. And those who are used to thinking, all right, I'm ready for the next step, when they get there, sometimes feel very unprepared for what that entails, what those hours will look like, and what it means to lead a team. And that's where, as we put research and we're identifying what would be helpful, is thinking of these three areas that would really benefit any one of you out there who are starting to think about and dealing with that, working with that challenge, as well as an opportunity.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It puts pressure on it, right? Victoria, we've seen that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Drew, do you have, before we're going to get into the details of the study results in a moment, but are there any things you want to add kind of about how critical it'll be to prepare these frontline leaders given the current economic climate? Anything to add, Drew, before we get into the study results?
Yeah, especially with, again, you got a growing workforce that's also retiring. And we're starting to see a lot of induction of new technology, new skills. AI is skyrocketing. Having very future-focused workforce allows for one that's more skilled with these different organizations, and then also ultimately a better employee experience, which we can dive into in a minute.
Okay, great. So with that, I want to start digging into some of the results of our survey and what skills frontline leaders will need to help improve the employee experience. And communication was one of the top underdeveloped skills that we identified in this research. So Drew, I'll turn to you first. Can you talk through some of our findings on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One interesting finding on this is talking with all the different manufacturing organizations, we found that 77% see communication as a critical skill for their frontline leaders, but only 29% believe that their frontline leaders have this skill at an expert level. And communication can come in very different forms, whether that's how efficiently you run a daily stand-up meeting, those one-on-one conversations you're having with mentoring a new employee, or trying to understand schedule flexibility with an existing employee, or even just team meetings, talk about what's coming in from future initiatives with the organization.
So there's clearly room for improvement there. John, do you think this communication gap ties back to what we were just talking about with the faster promotions or something else entirely? Where do you think this is coming from?
No, yeah, Victoria, the external factors are always putting pressure on just how the ways of working are happening when you're looking at sites and thinking about manufacturing. And, for those of you who are actively involved in manufacturing site communication, this insight from our study would be like, of course, right? The communications is always a challenge, given the pace of the work that's happening, the short periods of time between shifts, opportunity to even, do we have digital signage or not around communications? How do you cascade that out across plant? One of the places I've worked had 46 shifts over, there was 3 shifts and 46 groups that were going through that, and so stand-ups. So trying to cascade that has always been a challenge. So what we're describing here around the communications is thinking of it as a skill. And how can you help, and how can we help in this promotion of people in leadership roles think differently about communications and where that would be, and start to reflect on that and make that part of the coaching, the development that you're having as we're going around from the different meetings that are in place. A lot of metrics are being communicated very clearly. How we're doing in production, very clearly communicated. Safety, always communicated. So those kind of communications have been refined and are very critical in the way operations are getting done. But here is when I'm looking at how am I creating that employee experience? How am I focusing on retaining that person, developing the person who's on my team that I need to focus on? What kind of conversations do I need to have about things they're doing about flexibility, things that they're doing at home? I mean, that's the kind of communications that are happening from, doing a stand-up to when you have meetings in terms of breaks, even setting aside time. One of our areas that we're at is they actually have these moments that matter once a week, and they look for time. So we're going to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I'm checking in with you, these check-ins that occur. So it needs to be really intentional. And that is where, when we look at having mastered it, the mastery part is this one-on-one communications that are happening there. So that's the context of that, and some examples that are out there. So acknowledging it's a challenging skill to have. It's so critical.
No, I think that's helpful because it's easy, like you said, maybe to identify that frontline leaders need to improve their communication skills, but kind of what are more examples of how they can do that, what these solutions are. Because I know there were some articulated in the report. Could either of you kind of speak to, more of these examples, how they impact communication, the importance of those touch points, between the frontline workers and the frontline leaders?
Yeah, Drew, I know. Why don't you share some examples from our report, and I have some as well. Then that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll stick with daily stand-ups, with recognizing that your team could have varying years of experience within the organization, realizing, hey, what I communicate, the goals for today may not be as in tune to someone who is maybe a new employee who doesn't quite understand a new process as with that same process with an existing employee who's more tenured. So for that frontline leader to really understand, okay, who's my audience? Who am I talking to in this daily shift stand-up? Who I need to explain a bit more of what are the goals for today? Or if my entire team is very well tenured, then we can do a lot more to the point, hey, here's what needs to get done today, and less that coaching and training and walking up to it.
No, I think that's a great example. Anything else to add, John?
Yeah, there's difficult conversations that need to happen, and equipping our frontline leaders to have some of those difficult conversations is incredibly valuable. And so when we think of our communication skills, it rolls all the way up in terms of that cascading. So if I'm sitting at a general manager role, I also need to be demonstrating what does that communication look like, and make it a place where I can have individuals come in. So my frontline leaders, they just talk through what this conversation is going to look like. You have somebody who is being very challenged with their shift schedule. For example, it's like we have to be able to focus on what that shift schedule is looking like, or they're having trouble with meeting some of the production aspects of their job, is helping them work through some of those communications. Sometimes it's just, you'll hear from the top down, hey, you got to address this problem. Change that script and say, hey, come in, let's talk about how you're going to address that problem. So that coaching, and we're going to talk about that, the importance of that mentoring and coaching in communication. Everything that we're describing from our study, intersect in a very important way.
Yeah.
But it's intention. Yeah, I mean, Victoria's listening, was here at the Workforce Summit, right? A lot of the discussions we're having related to this very factor is how are we communicating around a lot of our initiatives. And, I know you could talk about fame. Fame's a great
Right.
opportunity.
No,
Yeah.
that's a great point. I mean, I feel like fame's a great example here because we were talking about those being promoted so quickly in this new environment and not being equipped with those skills. That's why, fame and it's in the MI's fame program and their curriculum. They're helping people develop those professional behaviors. That's all in the curriculum, making sure that frontline workers have the verbal and written communication skills to be successful in the workplace for years to come. And it's really something all employers should be consider integrating, into this type of training to enhance their communication skills with all employees, not even just their frontline leaders. So we talked a lot about this topic. So I kind of want to get into the next part of the report. And one of the major findings was how 68% of manufacturing leaders see evolving workforce expectations among their top challenges in the next 2 years. Now, we just discussed how effective communication will be important to navigate these daily challenges they're expected to face. But how do they do that? How do they become more effective communicators? Can either of you kind of talk to kind of how they deliver on that?
I can take this one. Especially go if communication is what you do, emotion intelligence is how you do it. And we can think of evolving workforce expectations of that end-to-end life cycle of your employees from the minute they submit their job application to going through onboarding, to going through training, to working up throughout the roles to becoming a leader, and then ultimately to retirement. Their needs and wants are going to differ at every step of that journey. When they're going through onboarding, they're going to want to feel prepared that they know that they can execute on day one after onboarding. We're getting close to retirement. They want to make sure that they're set up for retirement. And if they're right in the middle of the career, they might need more schedule flexibility to really balance those work and life commitments. And that's why it's really important for these frontline leaders to really understand what are those individual needs for each of their employees and where they are on that employment life cycle.
No, that's
And that can happen
helpful.
with
No, go on. I was going to say
and
that
a lot
I
of
feel
times that may
like
happen.
I feel like emotional intelligence is a topic. I mean, you gave some examples just now, which was helpful, but it's a topic I feel like most people don't truly understand. I wonder if I even understand it myself. So can either of you give more examples? Like what is emotional intelligence?
As we were doing this study, bringing that, I guess, vernacular of emotional intelligence, when we think of our manufacturing environment, emotions is not one that we typically talk about or think as a word that we would use. Those should be in check, the aspects of what emotions are. But the aspect of emotional intelligence is being able to discern and understand more clearly how you're taking what the organization, what the production focus is, what we're trying to achieve, and then translate that into how you're interacting with an individual. And in our manufacturing environment, systems are very critical. We focus on a very system, process-focused approach. And when you try to take that aspect of your workforce as a frontline leader, is to be able to start to understand what sort of, we hear words like this, psychological safety. How are we making the ability for you to be able to voice some of the concerns that you have? One of the sites that we work with has as many as 16 different languages that are spoken. I've heard as many as 46. I don't know where 46 languages will come to, but the element of recognizing, okay, I'm in a situation where they're not like me, or maybe like the others. We have a more diverse population within our manufacturing environment right now as workforce. So that's the aspect of emotional intelligence, understanding how to create resilience, how to create the ability to speak up, how to be able to do your work better, and think through that as an individual and reward it, what that would be as well. So that's the kind of the impact. When we talk about rewarding it, is to acknowledge that you're having that kind of impact with that emotional intelligence that's there.
Yeah, so it seems like key takeaways of this are kind of that adaptability and resilience.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like, these naturally lead into discussions on the role of technology in supporting these qualities. So we talked earlier about evolving workforce expectations, how important adaptability will be in helping frontline leaders to better meet employees' needs to navigate that, which makes me think of another really interesting finding in the report about how 82% of respondents said they're gearing up for major technological overhauls, with 45% planning to implement AI in the next 3 years. But at the same time, 67% expect resistance from employees who are comfortable with the way things are now. And it makes me think about how important this effective communication will be as companies undergo these technological overhauls, because there's so many benefits to this technology, AI in particular, that employees are probably not aware of. I mean, AI can make their work safer and less physically demanding, offer upskilling opportunities. But so if leaders want to navigate this resistance, it'll be essential to communicate the positive changes to employees. So can one of you talk about what skills may help guide frontline leaders through these tech shifts?
Yeah, Drew, I know. Going back to the resilience and adaptability mindset. Going back to that adaptability and resilience mindset, for instance, if you're implementing technology that's evolving a process that's been the same for, let's say, 20 years, maybe it's a paper and pencil inspection-based process, and you have a lot of employees who are very skilled in that current inspection process. When you introduce this technology, there might be some concerns of like what that future looks like. I'm very used to this process for the past 20 years. Now, when we implement this new technology, it's almost like I'm going back to day one. So allowing your frontline leaders to communicate very transparently of, hey, we're all in this new technology implementation together, and we're going to work through it and learn together. That helps alleviate some concerns and rumors and assumptions around not job security, but more like job performance of, hey, I'm doing this for the past 20 years. Now we're planning something new. Having that frontline leader be able to communicate effectively of like, hey, here's how this is going to make our line safer, our training better, and really walking it through with employees too, to be more adaptable.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you provide, I guess, any real world examples? Have you seen this? I mean, we know a lot of this technology, it's in its infancy, but I mean, I'm sure you've seen this with manufacturers you've worked with on the ground about this resistance and, how they kind of navigate that and, be more adaptable.
This was really interesting for us, but not surprising. You talked about it, Victoria. 28%, they're preparing for these overhauls. They're expecting, half are expecting this to have some sort of an AI component to it. Now, the life cycle, let's share through life cycle how technology improvement works through a manufacturing environment, manufacturing company. Let's just start right there as an organization. And all of you on this webinar are experiencing some sort of transformation, some sort of technology that is being embedded in this. And it's a constant drumbeat. Improvements around technology, but there's big transformation technologies that can often be put into place. Now, the challenge is this: why we had focused on helping frontline leaders understand the technology, have the digital literacy, and ask these questions. Is many times these are impacting what's happening around how they are tracking inventory. What does master data going to look like? And these decisions are being made at a corporate level, right? They're starting to decide, they're gathering requirements. You begin to hear, oh, there's something coming. And then by the time all of the bits and bytes have been developed, and as you start to think of what those would be, that coming to the front line is sometimes an afterthought in many ways. So part of what we're sharing here is there's the ability right now to get very clear about expectations. What are the skills of the future going to look like for whatever you're putting in place? Maybe we could be doing something related to digital manufacturing. Starting to articulate those early and prepare what that literacy would be. So some of the assessments that we've done, so that's part of the real life example is one organization we've worked with. developed and created all of that technology and then tried to roll that out after the fact, doing training on the back end to resistance. And that resistance happens like when something's just put on you. Others said, let's start with an assessment of our sites. Where are they at? And how are we going to bring them along? So this came long before. And what is the fact that's really interesting is this was a sample of just 4 sites that we had done, is you kind of think maybe each site kind of has the same level of communications that is happening, the same level of training. There is huge disparity. And I'm sure as you think across your sites, the disparities there. Others had a really strong process of how they were doing training, work instruction, SOPs. Another one, it was much more ad hoc. This is all within the same organization. So knowing that and different cultures around how they do it, that being able to now put them on a bit of a scale, looking at what it is we're bringing that digital literacy, where should we focus, and how do we make that a little more tailored? So that would be kind of an examples of kind of a top-down, didn't work.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think
Yeah, I
this,
think
I
in
mean,
going off that too.
yeah, please go on, Drew.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I just wanted to highlight is bring your frontline workforce into the implementation early. So not day one of go live. It's hey, as we're designing the system, as we're testing the system, as we're building the system, let's bring in those on the front line, those frontline leaders to do the testing themselves with some guidance from that technology team. That way, they're aware, they have a higher awareness of what's coming down the line, and start preparing their teams for hey, this is what's start going to look like in the future, rather than hey, it's day one post go live, and now it's trying to work through everything, whereas involve them early in the process. That way, they're familiar with the system beforehand.
I guess would either of you recommend, I guess, even incorporating this stuff into the hiring process? Because I think those are great recommendations for the existing workforce, but to kind of clearly communicate and set appropriate expectations for your workers, it'll be important to be able to communicate that as soon as possible, which could be even just in hiring and say, we expect these technological overhauls to happen in the coming years, and making sure they have the skills and, are able to meet that challenge and be adaptable. So, and I think this all ties back to the communication theme that, we touched on earlier. If leaders don't effectively communicate, technology can seem intimidating. And clear communication will help ease the transition and make tech seem less scary to employees. So think the key takeaway is the emphasis on coaching and mentorship to help workers and leaders adapt to new technology successfully. Now, I want to tie all these findings together. So, Drew, what do you see as important for companies to invest in to future-proof their workforce?
Absolutely. So we definitely recognize that the investment in technology is already there, but at the same time, you have to match that investment in your people as well. It's one thing to start investing in technologies, but you also need to apply that same investment in training your people and preparing your people. That way, when these technologies are introduced, your workforce is more prepared, adaptable, and resilient to work through these new technologies and even train their people to take on additional technologies more into the future.
And John, do you have any thoughts on how to appropriately balance all of this, the tech investment and people investments and developing the talent?
Yes, this is a constant thought around how are you getting that return on that investment that's there. And that includes being able to focus on what may be hard dollars and what you're doing around some of the work that's being incurred there. But we're talking about investment. There is the investment in the training, there's investment in the upskilling, but it's the investment in the individuals. And that's what we've really been trying to highlight here. And I know MI has just such a strong view of that, because MI is going out in these solution series, for example, is how are we investing in you? There is no cost to sign up for this, for example, right? This is an investment you've made in yourself to be at this webinar. there's a lot of funding that occurs around the workforce. So the investments we're describing, when you invest in technology, you're going to have to open up the bankroll and figure out how you're going to be putting some of that investment dollar amount there. As Drew's describing, investing in your people, yes, there's programs, there's leadership elements that you can do. But at a frontline leader level, that's the investment you're putting into those individuals. And how can you work with your HR leaders, your plant leaders to say, what is the gaps and needs for us? And we're proposing these three things just simply to start off with is, what are we doing around how we're helping them be better communicators? How are we focusing on this element of emotional intelligence, or what it is how are we helping them connect and discern and understand how to do that workforce? And then that third one is, we need to give them a level of digital literacy. And so the investment at that kind of time is challenging, right? We are dealing in an environment that is fast-paced, often the labor is underserved in who we have. When you look at your day and you're working there 12 hours, those 12 hours is, where am I stepping back and thinking, like, I need to invest in our leaders and invest in our people. So I like that's a great question, Victoria. Of course, there's big investment. How do you offset that and create the balance? The balance is making it a priority, finding time, and involving more than just one person. This is where you are getting, so there you go. And I'll share an example in a minute about another site, which I thought they did something really well there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what many companies are forgetting now, that technology alone isn't enough to drive success without a skilled, engaged workforce. And that's something, like you said, John, the Manufacturing Institute understands well, which is why we're always working to make those investments in those people. Yeah. So there's that need to align the workforce development with those technological advancements. Will be important for companies to bridge that gap.
Yeah. I mean, we're focusing on how do we create sustainable growth, a sustainable workforce, and scalability, right? How do you scale these things? And as we see AI coming into bear, there's challenges in terms of how we're addressing concerns, but also being very clear. We just talked about what that means in terms of the skill sets that you need as well. So a lot of times we think of technical skill sets that are in place, we can move forward with some of those others. Yeah.
No, and I think scalability is an important thing to bring up. I wonder if either of you kind of have examples of, because I'm sure, I mean, I think, John, you mentioned earlier about the issues again, across multiple sites, how are they, how can leaders kind of in companies scale, all of these solutions as they're scaling the technology that's still in its infancy? Kind of, can you give any examples for, how to make this more scalable?
Yeah. First of all, is that you're starting perspective here, right, is that you need to set a very clear direction of where it's your highest tiers. Look at how you're creating aspects of accountability. We all know about KPIs, some of those key performance indicators that are also driving what we expect in terms of behavior, ways of working, and holding people accountable for that. So you're saying scalability there needs to be some sort of clarity up front. But then it does begin as, how are we investing? That's why we keep coming back to frontline leaders, and just love this topic because it is where is working across all these organizations and working with all of you that is where you can have the most impact. So scaling that is, how do I invest time? Just even, if you're an operations person and you're doing Gemba walks, you're focusing on safety, how many are joining those 5-10 minute stand-ups? And when that stand-up's over, you pull that front leader aside, just as everyone goes off and gets on their forklifts or jump on the line, and give them 3 minutes of feedback. Just to say, here's what I really liked about what occurred. Here's something I think that you could improve on. Here's a key communication. Did you highlight somebody in terms of high accomplishment that occurred? So scaling, when we talk about scalability, how do you take that all the way out? But those moments where somebody who they do not expect, that's 2 or 3 tier levels above them, is standing there, and you can prepare them for it. I'm just giving that as one example of one of the GMs who is part of there's a 30,000 person plant with millions of square feet, would occasionally pick one of those shifts just to show up on the line. And that began to have a cultural impact and begin to get us some of the things they like. So there's big moments that you can make, but then there's the small moments that you can scale there as well. But it comes back to systems, processes, and leadership. So.
No, absolutely. So I want to give a little time at the end in case, those on the call have any questions, but wanted to give both of you the opportunity if you have any kind of final takeaways from the report findings, from your on the ground experience that you want to share with the audience before we get to questions.
I can start with this one. If we look at the other end of the spectrum and the cost of doing nothing, of not implementing these skills, you do run that risk of not retaining your highly skilled employees, which we've already seen from earlier today. Like there's too many job openings, and when you run the risk of not creating that employee experience for your employees, you're going to lose that skilled workforce. You're going to lose that committed workforce. And again, being able to effectively communicate, how this technology or other initiative matters to each individual employee is extremely important. And then also looking around the corner to understand, what are their needs in the future and be able to address them as well to help retain that talent.
Oh, absolutely. Anything to add, John, before we kick it to Q&A?
No, I'm ready.
Great.
Yeah.
Then I'll turn it back to Kelsey and for Q&A.
Yeah, you guys, thank you so much for going over this research and the collaboration. It's been really, really great. I want to make sure that I highlight a question or a comment in the chat here from Camille. So a huge issue is the conflation of job aptitude with people managing aptitude. And so splitting the leadership pathways into people leaders and technical or specialist leaders. Do you guys have any thoughts on that there? Maybe.
And sorry, Kelsey, I had a lag there. So if that was
Sure.
for me, apologies on that. Yeah.
Sure. So Camille had a question or a comment in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. So a huge issue is the conflation of job aptitude with people managing aptitude, and specifically splitting leadership pathways into people leaders and technical leaders. What is your thoughts on that there, John?
Yes. Okay. And this is a bit of what as we were starting off with Victoria, is that we are, in terms of technical leaders, you're providing clear skills of what individuals have. You can observe those technical skills. And so branching those off, in some ways you can, and maybe this is the question, but we have seen when you're trying to accelerate people around some of the technical skills that they're doing and how they are coaching and developing or assisting individuals to learn new technical skills, that is something that you can clearly see how those technical skills are advancing, that we can now have you helping support, mentor, create that apprenticeship model around technical skills. Then we talk about the people leaders that are there, is depending on, there's various aspects around different shops that you're focusing on, but the people side of that are a little harder to observe until they're in that leadership role, because they're not there. If you're a team member, you are doing some level of leadership. Say you're now a team leader, maybe become a group leader or a shop leader, and thinking of what those people skills look like. How do you then assess what those can be and what they should be on there? So my perspective is this. If we're asking is, from a technical view, I think the reason we're starting to see that and even promoting that is we need to get faster technical skills, and so that's to elevate those. When we're describing the gap is in those people leader skills. So they are being promoted more quickly, in some ways, and they're not getting the support around what those skills would be because they're not doing them day after day after day like you may be doing in terms of a technical skills there as well. And technical skills aren't just hands-on skills. I mean, there's technical skills you can see around data analysis. You're looking at the dashboards that are in place. So there are technical skills that are there as well. Your process engineers have very technical skills that you can observe and see. So that may be where you're seeing the disparity. The person who asked that question of why that would be there as well. Okay.
Sure. Thank you so much, John. And then another question in the chat, which is, I think, a question that most of our viewers may have today. How does this look different small and medium manufacturers? Drew, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one finding in our study is those organizations with over 1,000 employees notice that those with a positive employee experience have a lot better employee retention than other variables. And then for small organizations, what this looks like is very similar, but only about 63%. So there may be some other variables that contribute to that employee experience and retention. But major takeaway, larger organizations, the better your employee experience is, the more you're going to retain your talent. For smaller organizations, there might be some other variables that you need to consider that are going into attrition.
I am curious in your, boots on the ground experience, both Drew and John, if you think there's a reason why you're seeing the differences in those results, why it's so impactful in larger companies to improve that employee experience. Is it because they're not already getting it and the smaller companies they are? So there are other things that rise to the top?
I'll tell you not go, Drew.
I think conflicting priorities is something that's always a continuous problem. And large organizations tend to have a more kind of consistent employee experience across sites, whereas smaller organizations may have one site which may have a very unique employee experience and not being very consistent, and especially in terms of like the tools you're able to provide with your employees. Think of like flexible scheduling. If a large organization has a flexible scheduling tool, that increases a better employee experience because now you can manage work and life better. But smaller employee organizations may not have as many different tools and do the different priorities. They may not have that flexible scheduling capability, which might strain on that work-life balance.
That makes sense. Any other questions, Kelsey?
I don't think I see some great comments in the chat, and I want to make sure our viewers know that if there are any questions that are not answered today, that we will provide that in any follow-up communication. But I do have one more question for our panelists today. How are you seeing coaching or mentoring employees when it comes to all of this new AI technology? And I know we briefly touched on that in the tech space here in today, but how are you really seeing that as boots on the ground? Drew, if you want to touch on that really quick.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Sure, absolutely. I'm sorry about my connection today. So we really talked about tech and AI and how those new things are rolling in faster than we can all, kind of absorb here. So what are you seeing as boots on the ground as far as coaching or mentoring those employees when it comes to AI?
Using different use cases. So think about, if you're using a chat AI software, it's one thing to kind of do on the job as well, but then even what are those personal applications you could use it for? If you're doing, a road trip and you're going, hey, I'm driving from Chicago to Minneapolis, and I want to stop for a restaurant around the way. Using AI in that way to help kind of plan that route for you. So recognizing that there isn't just one application for AI, and there's other ways to get comfortable with it and get familiar with it, such as, hey, what's the personal applications you could use? And even having some like a lunch and learn, if you do what's called something to like a prompting party where, hey, let's cater lunch for everyone, and then we're going to try different prompts with different technology and AI.
And we have a nice framework you're thinking about here, Kelsey. You're thinking about AI is the work. What is the work to be done that AI AI is going to impact and influence there. So that's kind of rolling it back up. Is let's look at the work to be done and where is some of it that would be addressed by AI, enhanced by AI, even this aspect of agentic workforce. The next is the worker themselves, which is what Drew's talking about. How is that impacting the worker? And we've been talking a lot about the worker themselves. Is what are we doing to create digital literacy in that worker? How's the frontline worker doing that? And then the broader workforce is the other element of that framework. Is what are the ways we're doing to enable that workforce? And that's where we're starting to describe training, looking at hiring practices. What are we doing in terms of our talent acquisition approach for individuals who are getting those skills? And this is a big part of what MI is focused on as well, is how are we enabling that workforce through, looking at where different investments may come into place. What do we see happening around helping the workforce through the programs that we have that are going to be in these solution webinars, help to create a broader workforce preparedness for AI. So really like thinking about it in those terms when you're thinking, how are we approaching AI as what's the work? What does it mean to the worker? What are we doing for the broader workforce? And that's how you start to focus on that creation of future work that's occurring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to give a virtual applause to Victoria, John, and Drew for going over this research, highlighting some best practices, and really providing our guests with some key takeaways. And I see Jeff put some awesome takeaways in the chat, and we'll be sure to highlight those in some follow-up communication. I want to make sure that we highlight our next solution series, which we're excited to announce today. It will be with Timken and Women Make America, which is building the production workforce strategies for expanding your talent pipelines. And so really looking at how we recruit those new employees into the workforce. So stay tuned for an email and an official announcement and registration link. And then next, I really want to make sure that all of our guests know about our Workforce Summit, which will be in October. So if you don't mind to scan the QR code on your screen here, you will be able to find some key details, which include our official call for proposals announcement. We want to hear some of your best practices that you are doing, boots on the ground, some solutions that you are tackling in your workforce area as it comes to workforce talent pipelines and strategies. So we would love to hear from you for call for proposals, and that's the QR code that will take you to our application. And with that, I just want to make sure that we thank everyone for joining today. Please be on the lookout for some follow-up communication from us, some key highlights from today's webinar, the link to the webinar as well. If you happen to miss it today, you can share it with your colleagues. And Victoria, I'm going to pass it to you for any last second thoughts here.
So, I mean, I want to kind of tie it back to kind of some of the first stats that I provided, earlier on the call. It's, we have a tremendous number of job openings in manufacturing, and we're projecting that to, continue to be exacerbated by these technological investments. We don't just need workers, we need workers with the right skill sets, and the frontline leaders will be so important, to be training them and coaching them, mentoring them, making sure that they're retained. So it's not just about attraction, but also retention. So, that's why we wanted to be able to provide these solutions, in, real world examples that, John and Drew are seeing on the ground. What they're talking to manufacturing leaders about is, how are you putting this into practice? What does it mean for you? Because we know there's not always just a one size fits all solution. So hopefully, if you have any other questions about the research, I believe it was put in the chat. So there's a lot more findings we weren't able to touch on today. So if you want to see more of those specific examples of, the 3 different buckets we talked about, communication, emotional intelligence, and, that digital literacy, then please look at the report and see more there.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great
Thanks.
day.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
looking forward to the next one. Yeah, I think that'll be great in June.
Thank you.
Thanks.